Liberty Trust began as a concept in 1987. In 1987, we probably had conditions economically a little bit like they are now. High unemployment, interest rates significantly higher than they are today. And I remember still very clear one day, one of my elders came to me and he says, "Bruce, you do realise how much this recession is impacting our people. Some of them are really hurting." And I must admit I was probably a little bit oblivious to what some folk were going through. And so I said, I'm going to really commit this to prayer. And so I began to, in my early morning prayer time, every day I'd come before the Lord and pray. Matthew 6:10 is it, "Give us this day our daily bread." Just give us this day our daily bread. And in the original language, it's very interesting, that verse, if I could just take an aside, because that verse, we often think that it's like a plead, "Dear God, please give me my daily bread, I'm so desperate." But in the original language, it's not really like that at all. It's almost in, what would we call it, the imperative? It's almost like putting your foot down, "Give us this day our daily bread." It's a very demanding kind of emphasis, expression. And so I started to really pray it like that. And of course, I wouldn't want to talk to my father like that. But when I realized that the devil's a thief, I realized that sometimes we've got to put our foot down because he's stealing. And he's robbing God's people blind, as it were. So I started to pray this. And this one particular morning, I felt real urgency as I prayed it. And you know how just sometimes you feel like God heard. I just knew God had heard me. Went off to work, just filled with joy. And I was busy about my day, and about 10 o'clock in the morning, one of the ladies in our church, a lovely, lovely lady by the name of Jenny, came in, and I met her in the hallway, and I said, "Hiya, Jenny, how are you?" And she just said that she was great, and then asked how I was, and I said, "Look, I am fabulous. This morning, I had a great time of prayer." And she said, "Oh, yes, what were you praying about?" And I told her about the finance needs of our people in the church, and how I'd really felt that God had heard my prayer, and he was going to answer. And she just took a moment, she just looked at the ceiling and said, "It's time, isn't it, Father?" And I said, "Oh, time for what?" And she said to me, "It's time for me to tell you something." She said, "I've been praying about that too." And she said, "I feel that God's given me an answer." And I said, "Okay." I said, "That sounds great." And she began to unfold this little thought that she had, that Christians needed to come together. And she had an idea of maybe groups of 7, where they would come together and earnestly pray and ask God who he wanted to set free financially first. And then once they were sure which of those 7 families he wanted to set free, they should all contribute $20 a week onto that person's mortgage, $140 in total, and just keep doing that until the mortgage was gone, and then do it again for the next family. And she said, "Look, when I've prayed about what to do about this," she said, "tell your pastor, he will know what to do." Well, that was a bit confusing, because here I was praying because I didn't know what to do. But that night when I got home, I sat up in bed with my calculator, and I started to thought, well, what does this look like? What does the figures look like if I start to extrapolate this out? How long would it take? What effect would this have? And then I started to ask questions like, what if it wasn't 7 families? What if it was 50 families? What if it was 100 families? And then I thought to myself, what if they didn't give the money? Because you see, if you give the money, that's beautiful. But then, and that will solve the problem for that particular generation. But then when the next generation comes along, they'll have to do the same thing all over again because those funds are consumed. But what if they loaned the funds and therefore they could stay in perpetuity? And as I sat in bed that night with my little calculator, I started to bring up these really significant figures. And my wife was trying to go to sleep in the bed next to me, and I kept sort of knocking her saying, "Honey, look at this, this is amazing." And so I just knew we had a secret. And so one of the guys in my church used to work for the New Zealand Treasury Department. So I talked it over with him, and we decided we'd do a model and find out what it worked. To cut a long story short, we found a model that absolutely did work. And so we thought, we've got to do this. And so probably after nearly 18 months of research, we finally got enough parameters for how it would work that we launched it. On the night that we started, about 150 people came to the meeting. 120 people signed up the first night. And each of those families committed to giving $20 a week. And that started the Liberty Trust story.